force for change that moved human civilization forward. This is his explanation for how progressivism or positivism worked. Thus, civilizations, events, even specific individuals embodied this spirit, which moved humankind towards something greater. These two movements and ideas influenced a historian named Leopold von Ranke, who took these ideas and applied them to the study of history. Overall, he promoted 5 tenets that all historians should follow. Let's go over each one. Number 1, he believed that history should function more like a science. Number 2, he believed that God created humankind and nurtured it until rationality emerged, and then humankind were on their own course. Number 3, he promoted the use of primary research and travel to archives to look for original documents in order to understand the past. Number 4, he believed in history as progress. Number 5, he believed that historians should study history as it was and not place the context of the present onto events of the past. We often refer to this as historicism. These became the guiding principles of the German school, and other schools would adopt these values in their study of history as well. After von Ranke, the German school debated about whether the emerging German state had the spirit, or if the spirit were with the people of Germany itself. In the middle of the 19th century, during German unification, scholars chose sides between a German state assuming more political control and the liberal activists who demanded more political participation. The French Classical School. The French Classical School existed in very different circumstances than Germany, primarily because of their own unique history. Historians in France grapple with the role of the French Revolution, sometimes even which phase of the French Revolution represented the embodiment of human liberty and democracy. Some historians went to the ancient French origins of these ideas because they were unsure if the revolution represented true democracy or not. The French were also a little different when it came to the idea of the spirit, because unlike the Germans, they did not see the nation embodying the spirit as much as the people of France. And they saw this as unique to the French people, that progress happened through the people, no matter the institutions or government. This was a result of the ambivalence and lack of consensus as to the true impact of the French Revolution. Augustin Thierry was a French classical historian who saw the progress of humankind move because of the conflict of two opposing forces. He imagined them as races of people, conquerors and those conquered. He thought these two forces would fight each other. For him, he applied that to the ancient French people, who he called the Gallo-Romans. They were conquered by the Germanic groups, and he saw their resistance as the forebearer of freedom and liberty in modern France. Thus, the French people were the champions of liberty. This idea of opposing forces in society, transforming society, would not be lost on other philosophers, such as Karl Marx. Jules Michelet was a French historian who disagreed with Thierry concerning the spirit. Michelet believed that the spirit was with the people of France, as with the nation and all of nature as well. It embodied all things at all times, and was not in the possession of one group at any one time. The one Michelet idea that would stand above to represent the French classical school was his idea that the French people and nation were the preeminent democracy in the whole world. In his work, he claimed that at one time the Germans were a more politically developed people. However, by the 19th century, France was the nation and the people who demonstrated to the world the true meaning of freedom. Both Thierry and Michelet represented ideas important to the French classical school, the slow advance of liberty throughout French history. Different historical circumstances, which came to color the ways historians practice history. Just before the 19th century, the English Empire lost its North American colonies to the germ of liberal democracy and revolution. The English people also witnessed the French Revolution, which by the end drew England into war with France by the beginning of the 19th century. As a result of these experiences, English philosophers came to believe that slow change over a long period of time was more preferable to rapid change, which could take place during a revolution, as experienced by the French. Like Hegel was to the classical German school, English historians would be influenced by the statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke. Burke was suspicious of revolutionary tendencies, especially those that advocated for rapid change. Burke was most disturbed by the political and social havoc that visited France during the Revolution. Through that experience, he believed that change should only occur slowly, through the transformation of tradition. In his opinion, the French example demonstrated what would happen if revolutionary forces usurped and ignored tradition and replaced tradition with a new order. Like other philosophers of the time, Burke believed in positivism. However, for him, it was gradual and slow over a long period of time. The most popular of the English classical school was Thomas Macaulay. He wrote the multi-volume History of England from the Ascension of James I. Macaulay's work embodied the Burke idea of tradition slowly changing over time. He noted that from England's Saxon origins, its history was a slow march towards liberty, pointing to its long tradition of a constitutional monarchy and parliament. Later scholars would term this idea that Macaulay and other English classical historians promoted as the Whig interpretation of history, which set out to prove that the English people and nation nurtured liberty over centuries. A Whig interpretation has now become a euphemism for celebratory history, which promotes the idea of a march towards democracy. Another influential classical English historian was Sharon Turner. He introduced an examination of the Anglo-Saxon origins of the English people. Unlike other scholars of his time, he believed that the cultural and political origins of the English people began with the Germanic tribes that invaded the British Isles. So he looked to those ancient origins as the antecedent of the English political system. Thus we see here the gradual march of liberty familiar with the English classical school, but we also notice what Mark T. Gilderhurst refers to in history and historians as locating the germ. Locating the germ is when a historian argues for the ancient origins of a people, usually in some context of predating political institutions and ancient spirits of liberty. We see this here with Turner, and previously with the French classical historian Augustin Thierry, who wrote about the Gallo-Romans and their quest for liberty. There's one last idea that was important to the English classical school. This was the idea of the great men of history. Thomas Carlyle was a British historian who, like his contemporaries, admired the French Revolution and its change from below. He initially wrote with admiration for the French Revolution and what he believed was the triumph of the collective spirit, and at the time claimed that human society was moving beyond the influences of kings and powerful leaders, and now the spirit embodied the people as they did in France. However, as he grew older, he became more disillusioned with the example of the French Revolution and gravitated towards the idea that the spirit inhabited individuals who became great leaders, statesmen, and prophets. And through these great men and women, the spirit would transform society towards something greater. So for Carlyle, through an examination of these great men, we would understand the past. Finally, I want to move on to the U.S. Classical School of History. Out of all these schools of history we've examined so far, this was the one that began the latest. It was not until the late 19th century that U.S. historians would reform the teaching, practice of history on American universities. And they were heavily influenced by not only the German school, but also the English school as well. The first and most famous of this U.S. school was George Bancroft, who published a multi-volume history of the United States to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the nation. Bancroft went to school in universities in Germany, so he was most familiar with the emerging science of history there. When he came back to the U.S., he wanted to employ the methods and practices he witnessed to write a sweeping history of the United States.